Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and everybody's throwing around all sorts of buzzwords in today's day and age about AI and agentic AI, but very few people understand it and very few people actually put it into practice. And that's why I'm so excited for all of us to learn from today's guest, because this is someone who not only is at the cutting edge of technology, but I'm so excited to tap into his business mind as well, because he understands business from so many different strategic levels and, of course, weaves in that powerful layer of agentic AI. So let me introduce you to today's guest. His name is Harsha Mokkarala. Harsha is the founder and CEO of a company called EQ, which is an AI-driven business intelligence solution. With over 20 years of experience in revenue leadership, he specializes in using predictive analytics and machine learning to enhance business growth and operational efficiency. He began his career in financial services at Capital One as Senior Director of Online Marketing Strategy, where he led the digital transformation from traditional to predictive analytics-driven marketing. That set the foundation for his data-first approach. You're going to see how that manifests inside of EQ in today's conversation. He also spent over a decade at 2U, holding roles as Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Data Scientist, and Chief Revenue Officer, which during that time, he helped drive 10x revenue growth through analytics and AI-powered go-to-market strategies. So we are going to learn so much from him here today. I'm going to let him introduce you to EQ because it's really powerful stuff. But most importantly, it's not powerful from a data nerdy perspective. It's powerful from the fact that you can take action and actually use your data for business growth. So I'm excited about this one. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Harsha Mokkarala. All right, Harsha, I am so excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brian. Super exciting to talk to you and looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, likewise, especially because I feel like you bring such a unique perspective to the space that you're in, not only from the data side, not only from the tech side, but clearly you love the business growth side of it as well. So let's start with you taking us beyond the bio. Who's Harsha? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah. Classic, almost immigrant story. I grew up in India. Studied engineering in India. Came to the US and got a master's in computer engineering at the University of Wisconsin, and then got recruited by Capital One. Back in 2003. This is to come work for them. This is before people had titles like data scientist and machine learning engineer and that kind of thing. You worked in sort of all things data, if you will. That was kind of what it is. And a place like Capital One, data is sort of, there's this almost religious fervor about data and analytics and predictive analytics and, using that as a competitive advantage to build and scale a business. So, I got put in an environment that was just about perfect for a tech and math nerd like me. I found a lot of sort of people like me doing a lot of cool things at Capital One, and again was sort of lucky enough to be put on what was a very fledgling digital side of the business, right? So Capital One at that point was a monoline credit card company, a few thousand people. And one of the largest direct mailers in the country, and I got put on a team that was sort of attempting to reinvent the entire sort of financial services customer journey, if you will, credit card and sort of other product customer journey, if you will, in a more digital first kind of format, more digital first kind of channel, if you will, right? And that meant a significant transition, right? If you think about the world pre-digital in terms of how customer data got created and got leveraged, so very different, right? You didn't have to deal with multiple channels to begin with. You didn't have to deal with this whole real-time web interaction, all of that kind of thing. You didn't have to deal with the anonymous sort of first time I've never seen this. I've never seen this customer before. I don't know who they are, but I need to figure out as much about them as you can. Those kinds of things, for example. So I got to work on some really, really cool things in terms of inventing almost a new kind of analytics for how that business would work, that customer experience would work on the web, if you will. And I was a lot more on the tech side and the data side, but I was a curious guy. So and Capital One was great, and most of my managers and stakeholders were kind enough to let me in and say, hey, you want to learn more about the business? Do you want to see how the business actually operates and how the things you build get used to drive real business outcomes, if you will? So I got to go along on that sort of a journey, and then spent got an opportunity and spent the later half of my time at Capital One. I spent over 10 years at Capital One, almost 10 years at Capital One, actually running all things digital for the credit card business, and got to see that business scale from being sub 10% or a small portion of the business to well over 50% of the business during my time there. So I got to see firsthand how do you sort of build cutting edge data and analytics. How do you sort of invent entirely new language almost in terms of how you use customer data and predictive analytics to shape a business. And then I got to see how to then use it to actually scale a business. So I talk about sometimes how sort of everything I know I learned through that kind of formative kind of experience, for example. And then I got to go to 2U, early stages of that company, pre IPO, and sort of got to apply a lot of what I learned at Capital One towards helping scale that business. I was, started out on the analytics side of the business again, built a lot of the analytical sort of, the data infrastructure, the analytical frameworks, all of that kind of thing. Then got to become the chief marketing officer, chief revenue officer, and really be at the helm of scaling that business from its early stages to a post-IPO, close to $1 billion in revenue, that kind of thing, for example. So, I don't know whether I was lucky, right place at the right time, the right skill sets, all of those kinds of things, got to basically both build really cool things and see them in operation, in terms of see them sort of succeed at driving real business results, right? Therefore, both of which are very near and dear to me in terms of what I like doing. Right? I want to build cool things, but I want them to be really used and applied to solving business problems. So the business challenge comes first, and then the cool tech or the data analytics or the math comes afterwards. And the marrying those two is kind of where most of my career has been spent, where most of my skill sets come from, if you will.
Yeah, I so appreciate that overview. There's so many cool things in there that I'm excited to go in different directions with you. But first, you talk about luck, and I've always loved that quote. The harder I work, the luckier that I get. So it's no surprise to me that, of course, an element of luck is there, but it's because you put yourself in those positions. But really what I appreciate about your story is the fact that it's so clear to me that you stack experiences. You talk about how what you picked up at Capital One, you brought to 2U, and I would imagine that what you learn at 2U, you are bringing to everything you're building with EQ. So you've got to fill that gap in for listeners who aren't familiar with EQ just yet. I'm so excited about the work that you're doing, especially as someone who lives inside of Slack. I, as an end user, I'll tell you that, Harsha, is that I love the fact that you're building a solution that thinks about our existing workflows. So introduce listeners to EQ.
Absolutely. So, that long 20-odd year journey, which, on all the gray hairs you see, EQ is basically, for me, the sum total of all of that, right? It's sort of, almost sort of my career in a bottle, if you will, right? I talk about the story of how at Capital One, to build sort of real data infrastructure, we were sort of literally buying servers and stacking that in data centers, and we're worrying about connectivity and those kinds of things, for example. By the time I got to 2U, you had the cloud and cloud-based sort of data warehousing and BI tools and programming languages like Python and all the open source libraries that come with it that help you build models, all of that kind of thing. So, you didn't have to worry about sort of physical sort of hardware and software layers and that kind of thing, but you still needed lots and lots of very specialized skill sets and people to build this functionality, people that are not easily available, there's people that are not sort of widely available sort of everywhere, if you will. And so EQ for me is sort of the next logical step in that journey, if you will, right? The belief the belief or the hypothesis underneath EQ is that, today with agentic AI and sort of Gen AI in particular, right, and all the advancements in ML and predictive analytics on top of that, right, you can deliver exceptional data science, right, for companies large and small, without the sort of daunting levels of people and infrastructure investment that would have taken 20 years ago or 10 years ago or even 5 years ago to stand up for companies, right? If you think about standing up a good data science function for a company that may or may not have some of this, right, it's a $500,000 investment, easy, right? And that is if you know how to hire the right kinds of people and build the right stack and all of those kinds of things, for example. That's exactly where EQ comes in, right? Our mission is to deliver an agentic AI data team, right? Starting with sort of the very fundamentals of data engineering and building the right predictive analytics and customer behavioral data, et cetera, all the way to the AI analyst that you referred to, the analyst function that you referred to that sits in Slack, that mimics the experience of having your best analyst accessible to you right there any time of the hour, any time of the day, whenever you need them. Hey, I'm in the middle of an errand, but I came up with something that I wanted to quickly. I came up with a hypothesis or a thought that I want to quickly verify with data, and sort of it's right there, right? The advanced analytics and the almost like the supercomputer level sort of analytics right there in your palm for you to interact with and go back and forth with. So EQ is basically solving for that problem, right? Let us help you build a data science function or scale your data science function for a fraction of what it would have cost you, should have cost you in the past, and do it in an accessible, embedded way that lets you interact with it and understand your business from anywhere, and apply these skill sets or these techniques to helping you grow your business.
Yeah, as someone on the other side of this, when I hear you talk about having a data team, well, Harsha, I'm a small business owner. At my level of scale, I haven't ever had the luxury of having a data team, but I would imagine that if I did have a data team or even one data scientist, part of the value add there is proactivity, is them looking at the data. Of course, I mean, you personally have so much experience with data. I'm sure that you would look at things in any of my businesses and say, well, Brian, there's a huge opportunity right here. We should do something here. That proactivity is such a huge value add, and that's why I'm so excited about agentic AI, is because it's not solely limited to the things that I prompt it with. Talk to us more about that proactive side of it.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think for us at EQ, right? This is where we are sort of a data team, not just a data analyst or a data scientist or something like that. Right? It starts with good data, right? It starts with saying, look, wherever your data is, that describes your customer journey the best. And we use the saying often at you that sort of, your business, but more often than not, your data doesn't know your business. Your data is not structured to where it best describes your business or your customer journey, for example. So it starts there. It starts with sort of, hey, how do we best describe this customer journey in data, right? And these are oftentimes, even for a small business, these are oftentimes lengthy customer journeys, right? It starts with, your very first interactions on ad platforms or, on your website with your customers, all the way to, potentially conversations or chat transcripts, all the way to usage of the product and sort of, how revenue gets generated over a prolonged period of time. It's all of that data. So it starts with, getting the right data in place that sort of best describes your customer journey. And from there, moving into, things like machine learning to do predictive analytics and agentic AI workflows, right? This is sort of where, a lot of times you're absolutely right. Like most times, if you're a CMO, you're a CRO, you're a CFO, you might even struggle to know what questions to ask. What can I even get out of this, for example? And that's sort of where EQ really, really shines, right? It is in helping you understand sort of what the capabilities of your own data are that you might not know, and then use it to frame real actionable questions, right? So with our agent, right, analysis questions, like for example, hey, using what I have, like tell me my best path to another $500,000 in revenue, right? Like that's sort of a question which today takes businesses large and small, whether you have the skill set or not. You might even have a skilled data scientist on your team, but like that sort of workflow usually takes days for you to get to, right? Whereas with agentic AI, you can get to that in minutes. And by the way, we are here as your expert team to help you sort of both imagine and build that sort of intelligence in your business that lets you that lets you drive at an outcome, right? I'm going to give you a little scoop on a new feature that we're actually working on that just about to go live. We call it morning queue, for example. Morning queue is the notion that sort of when you come in the morning, just like a daily briefing, what if we can use your data to tell you sort of, hey, where the business is at, right? Tell us what questions are important to you. And by the time you come in the morning on Slack, you have an answer. You have a little bit of a digest of sort of, hey, here are some things that happened, while you're sleeping. And go look at, here are some areas to dive into, that kind of thing, for example. So we're constantly looking for ways in which we can better describe your customer journey and then use that, with analytics to help you just get a little bit smarter about your business every day, right? Sort of, to your point about, getting lucky. Getting lucky is about sort of, finding that next 1% every single day. If you keep finding that, then, you get there. And that's sort of what our intent is with our stack.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way you phrase that, Harsha. And I love the fact that you talk about imagine and build, because I had a guest on recently. We were talking about AI, and the guest said that really in a world of AI, our only limitation is our imagination. So many things are possible to us. And that's why I'm totally going to put you on the spot as a gateway, as someone who really understands this stuff and can shine a light on it for our audience, is that a lot of people, that is the limiting factor, especially when they hear about agentic AI, is people are trained, and kudos to OpenAI for bringing large language models to the masses and having that chat interface. People view AI usage as that, as I prompt this, you output that, and then we go back and forth. How is agentic AI different? What should we know about all the different possibilities so we can even start to imagine that?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest way to think about it is, and I'll speak in particularly in my field, in sort of the analytical kind of field, if you will, right? So this has always been true about doing good analysis, right? Which is, you go in, I'm trying to answer a question, and I go in, I get a data set prepared. I'll look through that data set. I know that there are this outlier, that thing that was weird about the data back when that happened. Hey, that period during COVID is weird and it's different. I don't need that in my data set because that sort of spoils my insight, right? Sort of, there's a whole bunch of then sort of judgment you apply and say, look, I'll remove that, take this out, prioritize that, change this column, all of that kind of thing, for example. And then sort of, you start to sort of figure out, okay, how do I then build charts or build sort of visuals or build my understanding of the data, and then how do I sort of weave a narrative around that, right? How do I actually tell a story with that data, if you will, right? Used to be that we had machines that did a task, and then you then, as the human, applied sort of layers and layers of your judgment, often manual, often repeat work, often grunt work, for example. You then sort of use a machine to do something else, right? And then, then applied your judgment, then next, that kind of thing, for example, right? That's sort of how, at least, I'm not talking analytical workflows, but that same workflow you can imagine for anything, right? If you can imagine that same workflow for booking airline tickets or whatever else, for example, right? And the beauty of agentic AI is that you're now able to have the machine sort of string together thought and reasoning and sort of multiples of those steps. That middle layer that you had to constantly intervene, you still have to. Humans still have a place in terms of figuring out what to do, figuring out sort of the creativity aspect of it, the end sort of use case aspect of it, etc. But if you imagine that workflow that had sort of so much manual human intervention at lots of places and judgment and things like that, agentic AI basically means you're now freed from that, right? You can now sort of programmatize it, if you will, if I can coin a word, for example, and you can have AI basically run through that, right? It's things that software wasn't able to do before, right? If at the end of the day, if you think about sort of all of this as sort of software, software wasn't able to take that leap before. Software was good at sort of a discrete task, and that's it. And then you had to interfere, and then sort of drive the next task. We're now at a place where software can actually chain all of that together, right, and apply that type of judgment along the way, for example, and come back with answers based on that, for example. And that's sort of what the beauty of agentic AI is. It means that sort of the number of possibilities you can explore just went up, by orders of magnitude, because the rate limiter used to be that thing, right? That's your ability to drive, the next step and the next step and the next step. Imagine if I could string together 20 next steps, which means every combination of that next step I can now simulate really, really easily, right? Imagine the possibilities of something like that, for example, right? Sort of it's, I always talk about how sort of, people like me, got sort of the scientific method in some ways, or like apply the scientific method to sort of a bunch of these kind of things. Now you can sort of do that en masse, right? Experimentation and simulation and those kinds of things at scale. Things that like were confined to a lab at some point in our past now can be applied pretty much to everything real we do, right? Whether in business or in personal life, and that's the beauty of agentic AI.
Yeah, so well said. I'm so glad that I put you on the spot for that, because I think there's very few people on this planet that can explain that difference that eloquently and really with those tangible examples for our listenership around the world. And especially when I think about your background, it has become, obviously there's so many buzzwords. Everyone's talking about AI these days. Everybody's talking about data, but it just really screams out to me that you actually, it sounds like you don't care about data for data's sake. You care about data for an actionable business and strategic decision making, so that you can find those opportunities and pursue those opportunities. It's a quote that I saw in your bio about being data rich but insight poor, and I feel like that so accurately describes where we are on the web. I even think about, Google Analytics. What a powerful free platform tool that every single website on the internet can have. Microsoft Clarity is free heat mapping software for websites all across the internet. We have all of this data, Harsha, but most people that I talk to, when I ask them about insights that they glean from Google Analytics, they say, I haven't logged in 6 months. And it's clear to me you jump straight to the customer journey, which often starts on websites and in call transcripts, which we all have transcripts from now, thanks to AI note takers. Talk to us about bridging that gap, because obviously it's at the very essence of what EQ does, and it lives there, but bridge that gap for us about pulling out the insights from this data.
Yeah. So, you said to me, we started off with sort of, hey, data for data's sake, for example. There's definitely places where, like, I'm sure all of us would love to do data for data's sake, right? So, hey, you'd want to nerd out in your personal life on, baseball stats, or, my kids nerd out on the NFL, for example, right? Like, and, all of those are data-driven endeavors as well. And you probably do that just to get sort of, just because you love the space, for example. But when it comes to business, really, right, like, most of us don't have either the interest level or the wherewithal to just do data for data's sake, right? ROI is critical. And if you think about one of the things that's definitely happened over the past sort of, 5-10 years with the growth of these SaaS platforms, things like Google Analytics, which are free, but, other tools that you have to invest dollars into to stand up sort of data for yourself, right? There's a lot of disillusionment with the ROI of those tools, right? And the primary, at least sort of my primary hypothesis as to why that disillusionment on the ROI comes is because, because the point you just sort of, the thing you just repeated, which is, you're now data rich, you can measure a lot of things, you can collect a lot of data, right? But can you really actually use that to measure something meaningful, right? Measure something that actually creates change for your business or improvement for the business, right? And in some ways, us being data rich, right? Sort of, you talked about Google Analytics. Part of what happens with Google Analytics or Google Ads or any of these platforms, all sort of, we talk to companies all the time that have implemented, Tableau or Power BI or some other BI type tool, for example. You oftentimes end up with more dashboards than you have employees or customers, right? And then it's just sort of dumpster diving through it to find sort of that little nugget of insight that you're looking for. They're just too daunting, right? Sort of, for most people, they don't want to log into Google Analytics or Google AdWords or name the other BI tool, because it's just too daunting. It's just too much data. It's not directed for me. It's not, it's not approachable. It doesn't, it takes me a long time to answer my question. And even then I'm scared, because who knows what lurks underneath in terms of data quality and those kinds of things, for example. And that then leads you to where you get tired, and at the end of the day say, you know what, I'm just going to use judgment. I'm just going to go with what my gut says, as opposed to going through all of that kind of thing, for example. That's kind of what happens, I think, in that workflow of like, hey, I have all of this data and I have all of these tools, but then I'm insights poor at the end of the day. And the very purpose of how we've built EQ and where agentic AI is super useful is to solve for exactly that, right? Hey, let us curate your data to where it perfectly or as well as it can describes your customer journey, right? One of the things we do very early in when we start working with customers is, hey, like, let's tell you the quality of your data. We've got your software to spit out like, hey, here are where your gaps are, and this is what is stopping you from doing better at describing your customer, with your data, for example, right? And then again, the reason for us to be in Slack and the reason to be conversational is that's sort of how most people like to do their exploration of things, right? So the best way you explore things is, collaboratively with your team members, most likely, and in conversational kind of format. Hey, tell me more about this, right? Can you dive into this? Oh, wait, okay, that's interesting. Can you dive further down into that next thing, for example, right? Hey, can you give me a chart of this, right? Hey, can you use this now to project out what my next 6 months will look like, right? That is the way most of us like to explore things, right? In that kind of friendly, conversational, collaborative kind of interface. And that's again what EQ is trying to solve for. So effectively, like, address accessibility, make it usability and accessibility, make it accessible even to the layperson. Don't make them go through dumpster dive through lots of dashboards and charts and big data dumps and those kinds of things, for example. Give them surety, right? Like, give them surety that their underlying data is secure and in a good place and has the best hygiene and things like that, for example. And lastly, make it speak to them, make it speak to their business, their context, in their setting, in the setting they're most comfortable with, right? In the language they're most comfortable with. Those are kind of our core principles of how our analysis tools work, if you will. And a lot of sort of BI tools, the names you mentioned, other names, have sort of gotten away from that in this chase for big data and volumes of data and that kind of thing, for example. And sort of in that we think is a change that both we are following and the industry is going to have to follow going forward.
Yeah, I feel like we unintentionally really agitated the pain points of how fragmented data is across all of our businesses. And that, I think, I'll tell you as someone from the outside looking in on EQ, that to me is one of the most exciting ingredients of what you've done, is you've taken, you called it out. I love the way you phrase it. Most businesses have more dashboards than they have employees or customers. And it is so true. There's so many tools to log into. So I love the fact that you're bringing all of that into EQ and really powering an AI agent that works for us and for our benefit and can make sense in this fragmented world. So, Harsha, I knew that time would fly by with you today. I'm going to put you on the spot one last time, and this is a question I ask at the end of every single episode, and that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and knowing that you are one of us, you are a fellow entrepreneur yourself, what's that one thing you want to leave them with today?
Yeah, I think, the one thing I've learned and relearned even in my short sort of entrepreneurial journey, I came with some of it, but sort of have had to continue to remind my team every day, is, at the end of the day, it's about the customer, right? Customer orientation is absolutely critical, right? If you are not obsessive about, knowing what your customers' pain points are, right? And constantly driving your solution towards solving that, right? Then then you're going to miss. You're going to get. You're going to point and direct the wrong way, right? I see this all the time, particularly with technology startups, right? It's very easy to build something that you feel passionate about that may not necessarily actually address what your customer actually wants. And it's subtle. I'm not even talking about the general nature of sort of what you're trying to solve for, but the format, fit, customization, all of these aspects of your product that you're building to be customer focused, right? That customer orientation is absolutely, absolutely critical, right? There's no more important stakeholder for your startup than that. And so make sure you're spending plenty of time early on as you define what you're building, and repeatedly through your journey as an entrepreneur to anchor to that and anchor only to that, right? That to me is the biggest lesson learned. That's the lesson that I will keep learning, I'm sure. As much as we try to do it, I'm sure we keep falling short. We keep having to learn and relearn that lesson. So that is the number one lesson I would tell folks. Whether you're an entrepreneur or you're sort of in a more established business running some kind of function, care about that, obsess over that, make their wins your wins, make their losses your losses, make their pain points your pain points. That will take you a long way.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you emphasize repeatedly, because you're clear about the fact that you will repeatedly go through that and need that reminder. I very much have felt that over my 18 years of being an entrepreneur. So, Harsha, I'm so appreciative of you sharing that message with our audience. I'm also very excited for our audience to check out all the great things that you're up to at EQ and all the things that you're building. And especially because one thing I really appreciate on your website is as soon as you land there, it's a huge screenshot of Slack, a real life use case of a user saying, hey, Q, give me a list of action items to bring my cost per lead down. And Q chimes in like having your own data team and says, hey, here's in this marketing campaign of Google ads that you're running, turn this specific ad off, turn this ad up, increase the daily spend here, decrease the daily spend here. It's real life insights. So for people who want to check that out, I love how clearly your website shows those use cases. So Harsha, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
We are at eq.ai. Find us on eq.ai. There's a little form. You can sign up for the newsletter, sign up to have a conversation with us, schedule time with us, and talk to us. We're on LinkedIn. Follow us on LinkedIn. We're constantly dropping nuggets of sort of our learnings on LinkedIn as well. Or I'm at Harsha at eq.ai. I'm always up for nerding out over any kind of sort of data or business sort of topic, if you will. So lots and lots of ways for all of you to find us. Looking forward to talking to as many of you as we can, and very, very excited about the journey in front of us.
Yes, and listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. EQ is spelled E-C-U-E. So Q is the name of their very helpful AI agent that you can leverage inside your Slack channels and elsewhere. So EQ.ai, you'll find that link down below in the show notes. Otherwise, Harsha, on behalf of myself and all the audience worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation.